Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Becky Robinson. I'm so thrilled to be here today with my client and friend, Marcus Van Alphen, as we have a very special hour of learning planned with you on the topic of The Excellent Leader and The More Excellent Leader, two books that Marcus Van Alphen has written and released. So as you're coming into the Zoom room today, we hope that you will take a moment to let us know where you're calling in from by typing in the chat. And if you happen to be coming to this event today as a part of your professional development, we would love to hear about the organization you represent so we can give a shout out to you and your organization. So I would love to see from you in the chat, where in the world are you calling in from? And if you are representing an organization, what organization do you represent? So welcome, Maria, who is in Rome, Italy. Amazing. We were just speaking before we went live on Zoom about the fact that we often have an international audience for our events. And Marcus, you yourself are in Amsterdam today. So we not only have an international audience, we also have an international speaker. So thanks for those of you who are typing in the chat. It looks like we have callers in Chicago, in Orange County, California, Boardman, Ohio, representing Coalition for a Drug-Free Mahoning County, Seattle, Washington, a place that I'm not sure I know how to say, Paul. I know you are always at our events, and I don't know how to say the name of your town. Seattle, Washington. We have someone in Chattanooga, Tennessee, who works at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga with leadership development and programs. Amazing. We have Denver, Brooklyn, a representative from FedEx, Rhode Island, North Carolina, Georgia, San Francisco. Amazing. Thanks to all of you who are letting us know where you're calling in from. And here is a caller from India, someone who is self-employed. So thanks to those of you who are sharing. Please feel free to use the chat throughout today's event. We want to create a welcoming and inclusive environment for you. So to that end, you will notice that we have enabled closed captioning. So if your enjoyment and learning of this event will be increased, please feel free to turn on the closed captioning. I do want to let you know that we are recording today's event. We will have the recording available for you, along with all of our other events on our YouTube channel. And we'll send you a follow-up email with all the information about how to continue learning from Marcus Van Alphen. So before we get into our content today, I do want to introduce Marcus. Marcus Van Alphen is a leadership psychologist, an author, a counselor, and a trainer. And he has a master's degree in psychology from the University of Amsterdam and also an electronic and electrical engineering degree from the University of Cape Town. One of the things that stands out about Marcus to me is that he has coined his own phrase, observational listening, to describe his work in the world. So I'm really anxious for all of us to learn more from you, Marcus, about this area of listening called observational listening. So as we get started today, Marcus, I'm really intrigued by the title that you give yourself of leadership psychologist. So can you tell those who may not have heard of this before, about what a leadership psychologist is and how that is different from some other kind of psychologist?
Yeah, different. Of course, psychology is an interesting subject anyway. So psychology really is, as far as I'm concerned, yeah, it's not just about understanding people and understanding why they do what they do, but it's especially about influencing them, and especially influencing, obviously, from a good heart. So influencing them in the way that's going to be the best for their own well-being. So that's generally what psychology is about. And leadership psychology is actually just focusing the attention on one specific field, and that's on leaders. And it's not only about the well-being of the leader, it's him or herself, but it's especially about focusing on the well-being of the whole team, and seeing how we can increase people's well-being. And this fits well with the whole idea of corporate social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility, just to keep it short, is really about making sure that we do our things in a sustainable way. And I'm talking not only of environment, but especially about all our stakeholders. And probably the most important stakeholder we have in any company today are our employees, the people who work for us and who do the actual, who do the nitty-gritty of what we're there for.
Would you like to share an example of this empty barrel paradigm?
Yeah, the empty barrel paradigm is actually quite a nice way to start, because this is the way a lot of people think people work. And that is that, if somebody doesn't do what you want them to do, it's because they lack the correct information or they lack the correct skills. It's like an empty barrel. So what you have to do is you have to throw in the correct information, teach them the right skills, and then let them get on with it, and they'll just do it. I don't know if your experience is anything like that, but generally it doesn't have much effect. So just simply giving people the right reasons, simply giving them the right skills is not enough. And this is also where leadership psychology comes in. It says, it's all about something more than just information. It's more than just about skill. It's actually probably 90% about emotion and motivation, and those two are inextricably linked.
So I'm curious, for those who are listening, if you've ever fallen prey to this idea of the empty barrel paradigm of thinking that the way to get people to do the things that you need them to do is just to pour more information and skills at them. It sounds like, Marcus, you're saying that what we need is something different, which is a leadership approach that addresses people's motivations and their emotions.
Sure. And further than that, it's not just giving people the right reasons. This is my point, really. Just giving somebody the right reasons is not enough.
So what do we need to give them instead?
Well, the question is, do we need to give them anything? Or is it more just a completely different attitude of trying to find out? So in other words, how can I say this? Some people also say we have to motivate people, but people are already motivated. So it's not about motivating people, it's about discovering where their emotion and where their motivation comes from. Because once we discover what they are motivated for, then we can align with that, and it becomes easier to get them on board for the things that we want.
That's super helpful. And I know that one of the topics that we want to be able to cover today is psychological safety in the workplace, which obviously, as we think about being able to understand our team's emotions, we want to make them create a psychologically safe environment. So I know we have a poll that we want to engage our attendees in with this morning. I'm going to share it right now. And we are curious to hear from you as you think about your own workplace. How psychologically safe would you rate your workplace? Is it very psychologically safe, somewhat, or does the idea of psychological safety in your workplace need attention? And we'll give you a few moments to answer the poll. And while we do that, I see a question from Paul in the chat. Marcus, he's asking, aren't there a lot of situations where people need information or a roadmap to get the task done? And in that case, emotions may be irrelevant. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I'm not saying that you mustn't give anybody any information, because that wouldn't work either. So yes, people need the information. Yes, they need the roadmap. It's also the question of how much information must you give and how much must you allow them to discover for themselves. Those are entirely different questions. But it's not that we do not give people information. So information is necessary before somebody can do something. That's true. The question is, will they do it?
Well, let's take a look at the response to our poll. So in response to our question, how psychologically safe would you rate your workplace? Only 14% of our listeners today indicated that their workplace is very psychologically safe. We have 61% who are falling somewhere in the middle, and about a fourth of people here today who are saying that psychological safety in their workplace needs attention. So that is a really big number. How does that land with you?
This sounds about par for the course, to be quite honest. The psychological safety it's very easy to talk about it. It's very easy to say that we should do it. Yet this is part of my work also, is as a counselor, I see a lot of people who are actually the victim of workspaces which aren't psychologically safe. And a lot of my experience comes from clients I've had to deal with who've become burnt out or whatever, thanks to situations which aren't exactly optimal.
Well, let's talk about why in your work as a leadership psychologist, you place such a large emphasis on psychological safety in teams.
Well, it actually begins with the whole idea of why do you hire a person in the first place? You know, if you're hiring people just to do something and you know exactly how to do it, then it's actually just getting labor. But in most of organizations today, that's not what we're in for. We actually hire somebody because they have something special, they have special talents, they have expertise which we don't possess ourselves. So what we really want is we want people to have the space to do what they're hired for. So give them the room so that they feel they can actually put their expertise for the good of the company. As soon as we create a space where people are not psychologically safe, this means we get a certain kind of a behavior. And this is often called an anxiety culture within an organization. People do what's necessary, but they are very careful. They will not show everything. They will not share everything. They will not be critical on things that might go wrong, which from their expertise means that they're holding back. This means we are not going to get the full benefit of the person we've hired. Whereas as soon as you make people feel safe, you make them feel, okay, I'm allowed to be here. I'm allowed to share my knowledge. I'm allowed to share my expertise, my talents, and I'm not going to get my head chopped off in the process. We're creating a completely different space.
So we need to really think about why have we hired people and how can we create an environment in which they can contribute at their best.
Sure, because I know that with a lot of companies, they spend a lot of time, money, and energy hiring people, and they do not look at how do we retain these people, which means that the exit stream is as big as the input stream. This is wasting a lot of time, energy, and resources.
And it's exhausting too, isn't it?
I bet. For both parties, actually, eh? It's exhausting for the organization because they have to spend a lot of time and effort in hiring people, and it's also exhausting for the employees because they have an ever-changing stream of people they have to deal with in the team.
Yes. So I have a comment here from Cynthia that I'll bring up because it seems appropriate in the moment. She says, it looks like commitment, being responsible and or accountability is not much reality in most workplaces. So information and motivation don't work more effectively. What are your thoughts on that, Marcus?
Well, again, the question is, are we motivating or are we discovering what someone's motivation is? Look, let's be honest. For certain kinds of work, what do you want is you want somebody who can do the job. You pay them the salary, and as long as they do what they're paid for, fine. And that's okay. If you want more, then we need a different approach. So if we want more, we need to discover what is it, why does this person want to work for this company, this organization? Because when we discover why they want to work for us, we discover who they are, then we have, we don't have to motivate them anymore. This is the funny thing. So we can just align with them, and that's all we need to do.
So it seems like being able to create that understanding of a person is critical. And I know that in your books, you also talk about the importance of empathetic leadership. So can you talk about why empathy is such an important skill or approach for leaders to take?
Sure. I mean, empathy, and I'm not the only one who's saying this. If we look at Harvard professor Yamil Zaki, he also says exactly the same thing. He says the organizations that are already being successful are those organizations where empathy is key. So teaching the leaders how to empathize is such an important skill, and why. Actually, it's actually pretty simple. If you cannot empathize with somebody else, how are you going to discover what motivates them? If you cannot put yourself in their shoes, how can you understand what's not going to work and what is going to work? And empathy, some people call it a soft skill. I disagree. I believe you can teach people or learn empathy the same way you learn a hard skill, by thorough practice. And I know in a lot of my trainings, I've tested this out, and I've seen some very positive results as far as that's concerned.
Can you share some of those with us?
Well, this is maybe getting straight on to also the subject of observational listening, because this is actually some time ago already. A part of my work was training therapists. And in training, my speciality was communication. And I would notice, why is it that some people, they go into a conversation and it's easy peasy. They just sit down, they have a conversation with somebody, they get depth, profundity in the conversation, and it's simple, and other people battle. And this sort of thing about why is it so easy for some and so difficult for others? This was something that puzzled me. And this is where I was starting to look at what's the difference? Why do some people manage to do that so simply and so easily? And my hypothesis eventually was that the people who do it easily are those who actually observe. They observe very closely what's happening with the other person, in the other person. So this is where that empathy aspect comes in. That they're watching not so much what people are telling them, but they're watching what they're experiencing here and now. And this is the basis for observational listening, is teaching people how to observe what their communication is doing with somebody else, so that they are quicker in discovering which underlying emotions, which underlying motivations are present in the other. And really just finding that part out, and then discovering which skills can you teach somebody, just actual skills. That's not something you're born with, it's something you can learn. And that to me was very interesting.
Could you share an example of when you've seen this practice of observational listening really like connect with someone you were teaching or training, and what the outcome of that was?
Well, quite often, this was with therapists, of course, so a lot of what we were doing was role playing. And I'd often turn the tables, because my experience is, where do you learn the most was not in your role as the person who's having the conversation, but in the person who is the client or the person with the issue. So I'd swap the roles, and I'd play counselor and they would play client. And then sometimes you'd notice very quickly that what they were bringing into the conversation isn't something that they're just making up. It's something they are already dealing with. And then I've had it before a few times that somebody literally within 5 minutes sort of was just completely open and flabbergasted and saying, I've spent years trying to get this out, and here it's on the table. And the only difference was focusing on somebody's emotions, looking what's happening with them, noting that, and sounds a bit of a wrong word to say, playing in on that, but I don't mean that in a negative way.
So why is it so important in the workplace for us to be able to practice this skill of observational listening?
This has been also a part of my journey. Is a lot of my clients, as I say, get sent to me by organizations because they're either stressed out or burnt out or having issues. And so part of what I've discovered as well was, okay, what makes people tick? What also can go wrong? And then also looking at some of the paradigms people come with. And I've had people in all kinds of levels of the organizations. I've had managers, I've had directors, I've also had the normal work floor employee, so, and everything in between. A lot of the companies who ask for my services are high-tech companies. So there you also have a different kind of leadership style. And really, when you get down to it, a lot of people believe emotions don't have a place in organizations. And I find this amazing, because how are you going to live if you do not experience emotions? How are you even going to do something if you don't experience emotions? To me, that's an impossibility.
So I see a question from Paul. He's wondering, what should I be observing about what you're doing as you deliver your comments? So I think the question is about observational listening. If I'm the leader who's trying to practice this skill, what am I looking for?
Actually, I think a lot of what I teach people, they can already do. So it's nothing new I'm teaching them. Often it's what I'm doing is making them aware of these things and getting them to be more aware, and therefore also putting things in more deliberately and understanding better which way they can use things and when not to use things as well. There's no one size fits all. In psychology, it's all about statistics. Sounds funny to say that perhaps, but the only thing we can do is increase the chance that something is going to work. And this is really my thing. So if I ask you, how would you, for example, gauge someone's emotion, I'm sure you're going to come up with a couple of answers.
Sure, I would maybe look for their body language. I would look for some other like nonverbal cues, like maybe the look on their face, or maybe their attentiveness, or like how present they are with me in the conversation. I mean, I would look for like obvious signs of emotion.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is it's not that difficult. So it's more a matter of honing those skills of trying to see, okay, so what must I focus on? Because if you really start thinking about it, you'll find that most of the emotion you see the quickest in somebody's eyes. So just spending just a little bit more time on looking at how somebody's looking at you can already give you a huge amount of information of where they're coming from.
I think that probably increases the importance of virtual meetings being with cameras rather than only on the telephone, or, with cameras turned off, because we're going to miss so much of that if we're not looking at someone.
Sure. I know that a lot of people are surprised when they hear that my counseling practice has been online since 2008. So for me, working online has never been an issue.
So I see a question here from Minette, just to follow up, and she's curious, how do you verify that you've read the other person's emotions correctly? Because we can often jump to the wrong conclusions.
Correct. There's simple ways. The simplest way is to ask. Hey, if I look at you now, you seem very excited about this. Did I see that correctly, or did I get that correctly? Something like that, you can ask. And the other thing is that if you do react on somebody's emotion and you've hit the wrong one, you will see it straight away. You'll see it in their expression. So you can straight away say, oh, I got that one wrong, didn't I?
Yeah.
And that opens up a space to continue the conversation. So part of what I also believe is it's got to do with vulnerability. Do I dare to be vulnerable enough to make mistakes? And be vulnerable enough to admit my mistakes. Because if I'm not vulnerable, how am I going to expect the other person to be vulnerable towards me?
Yes, that's very true. Leaders have to go first with that.
Sure.
Okay, so I am wondering, what would be some signs that a leader isn't practicing observational listening? And I was even thinking about this as you were talking, because when we're thinking about what do we have to do to be able to practice this skill, sometimes it has to start with being present in the moment. And I was realizing I had a meeting earlier today where I was admittedly, I told the person I was meeting with, hey, I'm kind of multitasking here. I have a couple things I have to get done. Well, there's no way on earth that I can observe how that other person is doing if I'm wrapped up in trying to do two things at once. So we first have to make a commitment to being present with the people that we're with, because otherwise we're not going to observe or notice anything.
Sure. I mean, what you're already mentioning, one of the primary things, multitasking, we know there is proof in science. There's a lot of research that's already been going for a long time that just shows multitasking. Nobody can multitask properly. It's not something reserved for women. It's not something reserved for men. Neither women nor men can multitask, period. And so we might as well get that in our heads. So if you really want to get a good conversation going, and actually, you know this, if I'm sitting on my telephone and apping whilst I'm talking to you, you don't feel that connection. So, you know, rule number one really is you've mentioned it, is be present and be absolutely present. Mm-hmm. The other telltale sign that to me is very easy to also measure is who's talking the most, who's asking the most questions. If it's the other person who's asking the questions and you're doing all the talking, you're probably not listening that well. Try turning it around. Try you ask the question and get the other person to start talking.
That's a powerful practice, to be sure. I'm feeling like I missed a question here, that we wanted to talk about the importance of observational listening for creating additional psychological safety in the workplace. Sure. So I'm wondering, Marcus, if you could expand on that. What's a step that leaders who are listening today could take to make their organization's cultures more psychologically safe?
You know, I think the biggest problem with safety, with psychological safety, is if you do not feel heard as a person, how can you feel safe? So I think that this is really where observational listening comes in, is by being present, by listening, by aligning yourself with what's happening with the other person, you start understanding that other person. So that's one positive side, but the other person feels heard. And that the other person feels heard, this is, as far as I'm concerned, the most important part of psychological safety. So if you're actually aligning with what that other person needs, then you're also able to see when something doesn't match what they need. So let's take something simple. This happens very often. Something goes wrong in an organization. What happens? If you go on to the person and say, why the hell did you do this? This is a perfect example of how you're not going to create safety. Because you're actually pointing a finger, you're saying, you did something wrong, explain, defend yourself. Okay, defense comes from a part of your brain where you're not feeling safe at all. Defense comes from a part of your brain where anxiety rules and you have to survive. So you're in a sort of what I call survival consciousness. From your survival consciousness, you're not going to get real good answers. So this is a typical way in which you lack psychological safety in a team. So people need to get that feeling that I can be who I am, so I can be authentic, and I can tell things like they are. I don't need to worry that somebody's going to chop my head off. So an anxiety culture, for example, when things go wrong, you notice that straight away people start pointing fingers. They start saying, no, it's not my fault. It's because of this, it's because of that, they did something wrong. And you see all this finger pointing. That's again a sure sign, no psychological safety. And it actually starts with you as a leader. It starts with you as a leader to make sure that you create a space in which people are allowed to be authentic. And this is where that observational listening is an ideal tool. It's not an end, it's a means. It's a way of getting somewhere where you can understand people in such a manner that you can create that psychological safe space where they dare to be themselves and they dare to tell you from their talent and expertise what's necessary.
So for those who might be listening who want to begin to learn more about observational listening, are there some specific tools that you can recommend for our listeners to implement so that they can become more skilled at observational listening?
Well, do you have a few hours? There's so many things, you know. I believe a lot of stuff we do already. As I say, it's more about becoming aware of what works and what doesn't work. To give a simple example, we often fear the silence. We think that if there is a silence in the room, something's awkward. Whereas often the silence can be very functional. A silence gives people just to let things sink in, gives time for thinking things over. So I'm thinking slow down is also one of the easiest ways to get into observational listening. Slow yourself down, have a look, broaden the silence, and just start looking more and asking more. In fact, the funny thing about observational listening is that once you start practicing it, you work less hard. So you lean over and the other person's doing the work.
I like that reminder to slow down. So let's think about the benefits that we can experience as we start to implement these approaches. So how will teams thrive when leaders become more skilled at observational listening?
Well, I think, again, going back to where we started, is why do you employ somebody in the first place? So if we're really looking for synergy, we're looking for that collaboration and stuff like that, then carrots and sticks don't work. So carrots and sticks, there's a lot of science that also shows that they don't motivate. So really getting into the team, finding out what people are there for is where it begins. Everybody has, there's also quite a bit of science to back this one up. Everybody seems to have three main reasons or three main needs that they have. And this is also why they work. And those three are basically the need for connectedness. We like to have pleasant interactions with one another. And whether that's with team members, whether that's with your boss, with your leader, or with customers, doesn't matter. We want pleasant interactions. The second part is that part of mastery, we call it often, sometimes also called competence. We like being good at stuff we do, and we like to get better at stuff we do. So this has also got to do with purpose. We like to do things that have a purpose, that have meaning. This is also why I love that idea of Simon Sinek about the why of the organization, which I also translate often to the why of the individual employee and of the leader. Why do you exist? It's a very confrontational question, and yet it's a beautiful question. So that's the whole thing about mastery. Competence is about purpose, about being good at stuff, getting better at it. And the third part is all about autonomy. And autonomy is all about, hey, can I decide how I do stuff, or am I told how to do stuff? So how far have I got room to maneuver and fit things in the way that it works best for me, for the team, for the project, for everything? So that sense of autonomy is also a really important one.
Thank you for that. I'm just thinking today about how many of our recent webinar events, if people have been part of the series, so many like overlapping ideas. So we have listening today, Minette Norman, and she wrote a book called The Psychological Safety Playbook for folks who are looking for more on that topic. And then we had a recent webinar with Susan Fowler, her book, Why Motivating People Doesn't Work and What Does. And these three ideas are critical to her thought leadership. So it's amazing to see how we can have these repeated reminders. And we also had earlier this year a series of webinars with Heather Younger about the art of active listening, this art of the skill of observational listening is pulls together many of these ideas. So I'm just basking in all of that learning. So for those of you who might be on today's call who didn't participate in those other events, I just want to just give a shout out that there's so many ideas that are coming together in this one topic today. So prior to taking some more questions from our attendees, I do want to take a moment to let those of you who are with us today know about some key ways that you can continue learning with Marcus van Alphen. And so in just a moment, I'm going to show you. We want to encourage you to check out his books. You see here The Excellent Leader and the More Excellent Leader, and both of these books will help you in influencing using the art of observational listening. So we would love for you to check these books out today on Amazon, and Wendy is going to put the links in the chat. Once you read and benefit from these books, we would encourage you to leave a review on Amazon. Your review will help others to discover this content and implement it into their work. And we would also love for you to share the books on your social media channels as well. And Marcus, can you tell us briefly before we go to some more Q&A about the free training that you have available for folks who might find it?
Well, eventually the idea of the books is not only that people read, but what I really would like for people is to actually start practicing it. And so this is where training can be instrumental. So for the first book, I've developed a series of trainings. So it's actually going to be 10 trainings that are going to cover the total content of the first book. Of which the first one is absolutely free. That's just to get people in the mood. And so anybody is welcome to do that. You don't even have to buy the book. You can just go and sign up and follow that first course completely and absolutely free. And whilst I'm developing the other 10, I'm going to be using a very friendly price, just so that people can also share their opinions, so that I can make that course even better by sharing, by using the ideas that they share with me. So that's the general idea. And eventually the idea is to have 3 books. So we have now The Excellent Leader and The More Excellent Leader, and The Most Excellent Leader is also in the make. And I hope to have that finished this year as well.
Wow, amazing. So many great resources. And Wendy has put in the chat a link to the free training at excellent-leader.com. So I want to go to some of the attendee questions that have been coming in during today's event. Paul is asking, what if there is a gap between the type of work the person wants to do but needs to do? How there are all aspects of all joys that aren't, or all jobs that aren't overly exciting and enjoyable. So
Sure. A beautiful question, because I have this discussion very often with people. I firmly believe that a large part of our well-being has to do with choice. Having choice. So this also fits with its section on autonomy, but I believe it goes further than that, and it's even got to do with the way we talk to ourselves. You might notice that when you're busy doing stuff, quite often the way we talk to ourselves, we wouldn't dream of talking to somebody else like that. You know, we are so critical, and I must do this, I must do this, I should do this, I should have done this, blah 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 blah. Okay, and this is a perfect example of where we don't have choice. As soon as we must do something, we should do something, or should not do something, there's no choice involved anymore. So a large part of what I sometimes deal with leaders with is the difference between the language they use towards themselves and the language they use to other people. So if you really think about it, must you do anything at all? Is there anything you really must do? The answer is no, there isn't. As you can come up with several examples, and actually, why must you do it? It's a choice whether you do it or not. So it's far better to look at, what do I want to do? And there comes the question that Paul was saying, and what am I prepared to do? Because yes, some parts of your work are bloody boring. and yet they have to be done. So the question is, if I don't do them, what's going to happen? So some stuff you are prepared to do because they serve a larger purpose, a higher purpose, or another purpose. And for me, this difference in language is critical. The way the leader uses it and the way he or she talks to himself. Some people call it masturbation. Getting rid of that is a good one, as far as I'm concerned.
Sure. So here from Rachel, any insight into why leaders sometimes say that they want their workers to be their best selves at work, and yet in turn, these same leaders stifle people's ability to be and give their best, and in fact, sometimes even thwart their ability to do that?
Good question, and probably several different reasons why this could be. A lot of the time, I believe it's because the leader is not really in line with why they are there. If you are the leader to be the main person, or to be, I don't know, then perhaps you're not there for the right reason. Because if you're really there, if you really think about it, this is also the idea of the upside down organization. Why does an organization have directors and the board of all these kind of things? They don't actually produce a damn thing, but they're necessary. In other words, they're there to support, and that's what they mean with the upside down organization. Everything is there to support so that that which needs to happen on the work floor actually happens. So just using that change in attitude, you'll find that a lot of leaders are there for their own image, for their own ego, for their own visibility and all those kind of things, whereas their actual task is to support the people working for them, in my vision.
So it seems that potentially if we could see our organizations as upside down the way that you're describing, if a leader could see their mission to be in support of those employees in the organization, that potentially they could shift their perspective on this topic.
Sure. This is also the difference between pulling and pushing, because a lot of leaders believe I have to pull, I have to push, I have to motivate. That you again going back to that subject of motivation. Do you have to motivate people? No, you don't. There simply is an easier way. Just be there for them, support them, facilitate, and allow them to get on with what they were hired for.
So I'm wondering about if you could talk a little bit. You mentioned when you were describing leadership psychology, Marcus, you mentioned that quite often organizations will bring you in to address a team member who has burnout or stress in their role. I'm curious as to your perspective about how leaders can either like help prevent that kind of burnout situation or address it when it arises.
So addressing it when it arises is actually too late, because then somebody like that really needs professional help. So preventing it is a far better strategy. And I think it really starts with our ideas about stress. And so this is also one of the things that I actually open with, is our idea about stress. Is stress, because a lot of people believe stress is unhealthy, that too much stress is bad for you. And it turns out from quite a lot of research, Kelly McGonigal is a health psychologist. I really admire her work because she really opened my eyes to a complete different perspective. She shows that the most healthy people are the people with the most stress, not the people with the least stress. And this is amazing. This is amazing because we've all been brought up with this whole idea of stress is bad for you. She finds out that there's actually one thing that makes stress bad for you, and that's the belief that stress is bad for you. That as soon as your conviction is stress is just my body, energizing me, getting me ready to face a challenge, that stress isn't unhealthy at all. In fact, stress makes you healthier. So just this basic premise in how do you deal as a leader with stress, and how can you help the people you are leading to deal better with stress, as far as I'm concerned, is already a major step forward in preventing burnout.
So one way to prevent burnout is to help people have a healthier view of stress. Any other ideas that you have?
Well, the other thing is, I'm sure you saw this one coming, psychological safety. I mean, if people are feeling psychologically safe, this gives them the space to do what they really want to do as well.
Mm-hmm.
Let's face it, most people do not go to work only for the salary. Yes, you need a salary to survive, but most people go to a job because it's fun, because it gives them something, it gives them pleasure. So if we focus on that pleasurable side, burnout becomes a lot less difficult.
That's helpful. Sorry, there's so many comments in the chat. Cynthia
You have to
saying,
multitask.
yeah, so Cynthia saying one of the most, she heard a speaker mention that one of the most, I don't know, most causes of stress and burnout is our expectations. Paul says, when your demands exceed your coping skills, you have a stress reaction.
Sure. And this is again got to do with, do you interpret your stress in terms of anxiety? Oh, I'm not coping. Oh, this is too much for me. I'm never going to get this done. Then we're getting into the anxiety part of our brains. And the anxiety part of our brains works differently to the other side of our brains. And in our anxiety consciousness, we're thinking only about survival. And that has a different effect on us than when we're in a sort of an activated part of our brains. When we're activated, we have a different intention. We love challenge. We want that challenge, and we want to beat that challenge.
So I'm still curious about what you said about if you're burned out, it's already too late. Can you expand on that?
Well, a lot of people say they're burnt out when they're having a little bit of stress. So I'm talking about people who are really burned out. These are people who are exhausted. They're physically exhausted. They're mentally exhausted. They have absolutely they cannot identify themselves with the jobs they're doing anymore. They're feeling sort of alienated from the work they're doing. You're in a bad place. Often people can spend weeks, sometimes months, not even getting out of bed. So I'm talking about burnout is really a serious condition. Being overstressed is still a precursor to that. So that's why I'm saying get in before it gets that far.
That makes sense. Let's see, here's a question from John. But from a management and leadership perspective, the question for burnout isn't whether stress response is normal, but whether the system design supports prevention and mediation.
Sure, I agree. So this is also again where you as a leader step in. How do you make sure that you don't over ask somebody? How do you make sure that somebody can also say no when they have enough? I mean, is the safety there to be able to say to your boss, to your leader, hey, listen, you're just dropping this job on my desk. Oh, I'm sorry, but I've got too much already. Are you allowed to say this to your leader? So it goes both ways. So I'm saying, yes, the leader has responsibility in ensuring that people are challenged to the correct degree, a degree that fits with the person we're talking about. And yes, the employee also has a responsibility to look after themselves. And there, the leader also has a responsibility because they can help somebody look after themselves by creating a psychologically safe space in which that is possible.
Well, yes, and I think it goes back to that skill of observational listening, that you're observing how people are showing up at work. You're watching for those cues about their emotions or what they might be experiencing, and you're bringing that empathy and asking questions so that you know what's happening with people.
As far as I'm concerned, and this is the big difference between observational listening and active listening, is with observational listening, you are really keying onto people's emotion, their state of being. So if somebody is going that route towards too much stress, too much going towards the burnout side, If you are a good observational listener, you see it a long time before they get there.
That makes a lot of sense. So the observation of emotion is the differentiator from active listening.
Sure. Sure.
That's really helpful. Janelle says having a support network in place is key, so people
Sure.
recognize and can help you identify when you're in the path to burnout. I didn't have this, so I missed the warning signs.
Sure. And again, you know, that talking about the support network isn't only at home. Your team is also a support network. Your leaders should also be part of your support network, your colleagues.
Definitely so. All right, so quickly a reminder to those who are benefiting from today's content. We want to encourage you to purchase books for yourself and your team to learn more from Marcus Van Alphen. Once you've read and benefited from the books, leave a review on Amazon so that others can benefit by discovering that these are books that could support their journey. And letting others in your network know about these books through your social media channels are a helpful way to expand awareness of the work. And again, Wendy has in the chat links to all of the free resources and also all the paid resources. And Marcus has launched an amazing resource called 10 Questions You Need to Ask About Psychological Safety in Your Organization. The link is there in the chat for you. To download that as well and stay connected to Marcus and his work. So Marcus, as we wrap up today's conversation, I know that you have some parting thoughts that you want to leave folks with. So I'd love to hear those.
Oh, gee, the question is, which ones do you want to hear? I think it begins with one of the things I mentioned, and that's the whole idea of why. Why do I exist? And I love this question, as I've said before. And for me, I've looked at why do I exist? And actually, I've always been somebody who wants the world to be a better place. And I've been this ever since I was a young boy. So that's still really my why, is how do we make the world a better place? And I've focused that onto a specific area. And my why has become, I want to make the world a better place by making people more empathic, more human. And this goes for everybody, but especially in the leadership sphere. I have no doubt that empathy is the way forward.
Thank you so much for that.